All right. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call the Legislative Post-Audit Committee to order. Please remember, everybody, that we are being live streamed. Remember to turn on and use your mics during the meeting. Members of the committee, I would remind you to turn in your travel vouchers. And one of the things that I did want to bring up, and I hope Chris can go up to the mic and just tell us a little bit about it, but I saw the memo on the peer review, and I just want to thank you and your staff so much for your excellent work, and I think it's really important for everybody to understand what a nationally organized or recognized organization you guys are. Chris, congratulations, and tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I sent a memo to the committee recently. We recently underwent our peer review, which is where staff from other state offices come and audit the auditors. So we are getting audited by others, and it brings a new appreciation for the work we do and why people get annoyed when we're asking questions. But I wanted to share that they were very impressed with our system, and we received a pass rating, which is the highest rating you can achieve. There was one written comment and a few verbal comments of a few things we could shore up a little better, which we will certainly work on. But I just wanted to pass along the good news. This happens every 3 years. And in the intervening years, like my senior staff goes out and audits Mississippi or Utah or whatever. So we all do ourselves. But anyway, great results. So
congratulations. All right, next item on the agenda is the county costs and obligations to meet state requirements. Andy?
Now it's on. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. If you flip to page 2, you can see the question that this audit answered, which was, how much did a selection of counties spend in 2024 to comply with state requirements for a selection of services? And how much of this spending was offset by state, federal, or user fee funding? On the top of page 3, you can see that we estimate the 3 counties we reviewed spent $28.8 million providing a selection of 3 services in fiscal year 24, which was partially offset by $9.7 million in state, federal, and user fee funding, and I will get into those details in a minute, but first let's talk about some background information. On page 3, and actually this is summarized nicely on page 4 in figure 1, you can see that the state requires counties to perform a lot of different services. What we have in figure 1 is what we call the core services, the main services. They have to do other things too, including things like trimming back vegetation to ensure that drivers can see at intersections. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the bigger things like criminal prosecution, election administration, emergency management, various types of tax collection, things like that. At the bottom of page 4 and onto page 5, you'll see that although the state requires these 18 core services, it typically doesn't provide any funding to help cover the costs of them. So most of counties' funding for these services comes from the tax revenues that they're generating locally. You can see on page 4 and on page 5, we have some example counties here. So we have Johnson County and Gove County, which are obviously at 2 ends of the extreme. And you can see in the bottom bullet on 4, 69% of Johnson County's general fund revenues came from local taxes. And similarly, although it's much smaller, Gove County, 67% of their general fund revenues in 2024 also came from taxes, so this is fairly consistent throughout the state. So in order to better understand how much it costs counties to comply with these state requirements, you'll see at the bottom of page 5, we selected 3 of the 18 core services and 3 counties to review. We couldn't do all 18 for 105 counties. So we selected, you can see in the top bullet of that section on page 5, personal property tax collection, which includes motor vehicle taxation and registration, real property tax collection, and criminal prosecution. When we got into the work, we found that the counties think of them slightly differently. So they have criminal prosecution, and then they sort of package the real and personal property into ad valorem tax collection. And then they sort of break out the motor vehicle registration separately. So that's how I'll talk about it for the rest of the report. But that's what we found when we started doing the work. And the 3 counties in particular, at the bottom of page 5, you'll see we selected Gove, Johnson, and Labette counties. Again, we thought this provided some nice variation in a variety of different ways. We didn't choose them randomly, and so these results are not projectable, but we think it gives a good cross-section of the experiences of some very different counties. Okay, so let's flip to page 6. The top of page 6 is some methodological detail, if anyone is interested in seeing that. Bottom of page 6, though, we get into the first service that we reviewed, which is criminal prosecution. So I'll start by just providing a little bit of background on what the service is and what it requires of counties, and then we'll get into the results. So criminal prosecution in 99 counties is performed by a county attorney, elected county attorney. They can do some other stuff too, in addition to criminal prosecution, like advising the board of county commissioners, drafting county contracts. It could be a part-time position in a rural area, or you could have one elected county attorney for multiple counties. Conversely, you can see at the top of page 7, 6 counties elect a district attorney. These are the larger counties, as you would expect: Douglas, Johnson, Sedgwick, Shawnee, Reno, and Wyandotte. They are only doing criminal prosecution for the one county that elected them. So their experiences are slightly different. They typically have staff attorneys, other support staff to help out with this. So you can see in figure 2 that we found that these 3 counties in 2024 spent an estimated $17.3 million performing this service on behalf of the state. So you can see that Johnson spent $16.7 million. Gove, by contrast, spent only $70,000, which is mainly a function of their vastly different population sizes. You can see at the bottom of figure 2 that in the course of providing this service, they also collected some revenues that offset about $846,000 of the $17.3 million. Mostly this is what we label here in the figure user fees and fines. These are fees that the county or district attorney can collect as part of a diversion agreement, which allows someone who's been charged with a crime to avoid prosecution if they meet certain requirements, and in return they pay a fee for that. You can see that that was $520,000. And then Johnson County, their district attorney's office also collected some state and federal grants specifically for their youth diversion programs. They said that other counties could apply for those and collect them too, but of the 3, that was just Johnson. So let's flip to page 8. Talk about motor vehicle registration. So this service requires counties, as sort of an agent of the Department of Revenue, to process motor vehicle registrations on the state's behalf. They collect registration applications, they're checking proof of insurance, they're collecting and distributing taxes and fees. To do this, they need an office where people can walk in and have these services performed for them. Often this is just the county treasurer's office, but a county like Johnson, for instance, may have standalone motor vehicle offices. You can see in figure 3 that overall, the 3 counties that we reviewed spent $8.3 million providing this service in 2024. And again, that ranges from Johnson, $7.9 million, to Gove, just $141,000. And in the process of doing this, they collected and were able to retain $5 million of what we label here as user fees and fines. That's $4.8 million for Johnson, down to $36,000 for Gove. And you can see just below that, we outline what some of those are. So they are collecting a wide variety of fees while they perform the service on behalf of the state. Some of them they get to keep. So for example, counties can retain $2 of each title application fee they collect. They collect other fees like a $5 county service fee, up to $5 for a facility fee, depending on how many locations they have. But as you can see at the bottom of page 8, they're collecting a lot more than just $5 million. So in fiscal year 24, these 3 counties collected $34 million and were able to keep $5 million of that, and the rest of it goes to the state. They didn't receive any state or federal funding specifically to support execution of this service. Okay, page 9, the next section there, we'll talk about ad valorem tax collection. So this is, again, it's real and personal property tax collection, doesn't include the motor vehicle registration. And so counties are required by state law to collect taxes for themselves, for the state, the cities, the other taxing jurisdictions like townships, school districts, cemetery districts. Within the counties, they collect these, and then they distribute them back to those entities, whatever they collected on their behalf. The county clerk is calculating how much this will be, and then they provide this tax amount to the county treasurer, who collects it from the property owners and distributes it. So let's flip to page 10. Figure 4 outlines how much this cost Johnson, Labette, and Gove counties. In 2024, you can see that they spent $3.2 million performing this service. This ranged from $2.8 million for Johnson County to just $157,000 for Labette. And in the process of doing this, they collected $3.9 million, $3.6 million for Johnson and $45,000 for Gove. You can see that in figure 4. Now, the revenues that they're collecting as part of this primarily reflect delinquent taxes. So if someone is behind on their taxes, state law requires counties to charge them interest until they finally get caught up and pay that off. So what you see there is the delinquent interest charges primarily that they're collecting as part of this. In this year, for these 3 counties, it happened to be more than they spent. So this is net positive, I suppose you could say, for these 3 counties for this year. That's not a dependable funding source, though. I want to emphasize that. It just so happened that they collected more than they spent in this year, but whether they do that depends on how many delinquencies there are, how far behind people get, and whether they get caught up and pay off those delinquent interest charges. And again, they didn't receive any state or federal funding specifically for those. On 10 and 11, you can see there we kind of compared what we thought was like the bare minimum that a county could spend in order to meet the requirements of state law. And we compared that to what they spent. You can see in figure 5 they align pretty well. They're not spending a lot more than what would be required for the most basic form of these services, so we had no concerns about any of that. Bottom of page 11 onto page 12, you see we have a total here of $19.1 million for these 3 services, for these 3 counties for fiscal year 24. I want to emphasize again, that's kind of a snapshot. It's not projectable to other counties. And we don't know whether this would be the same number or a different number, even for these 3 counties, for these 3 services in any other year, because it depends on things like staff salaries, whether there's a recession or some other economic condition that might increase the crime rate, or whether people are paying their taxes, things like that, that are totally outside of the county's control. Page 12, at the bottom there, we have some of the opinions that we collected from the officials that we talked to in the course of doing this audit. So we asked them about whether additional state funding would be helpful. In general, they said yes, because that's always helpful. But they also mentioned that there were some state process improvements that may actually benefit them just as much or more. You can see at the bottom of page 12 that all 3 counties expressed dislike for the movers motor vehicle registration system. They said it was slow and unreliable and made their jobs more difficult, especially at the end of the month when it's more prone to crashes. Johnson County, you can see at the bottom of page 12, their district attorney's office said that they did not appreciate the Odyssey court filing system that the state requires them to use. They previously had a different system that they felt was more efficient, required less manual entry, and was less prone, in their opinion, to data security risks like the 2023 breach of Odyssey, as you can see at the top of page 13. However, despite the challenges, they all said that they would like to continue providing these services for their residents. They thought that their residents would receive worse service from the state in terms of longer wait times, less convenient walk-in locations, things like that. So they, despite the challenges, expressed a strong opinion that they should continue doing these services. Okay, at the bottom of page 13, and then on to page 14, you'll see that we compared what we found for these 3 counties, specifically for motor vehicle registration, to information that the Kansas County Treasurers Association provided the House Transportation Committee in March 2025. So they provided estimates of how much the net cost was for all 105 counties for providing motor vehicle registration. We can only speak to the specifics of the 3 counties that we looked at, Johnson, Labette, and Gove. You can see our comparison in figure 6. Kind of in the middle of that figure, you'll see that our net county costs for motor vehicle registration For Johnson, 3.1 million, down to Gove, 105,000. Directly below that, you'll see KCTA's estimates for these three counties. They estimated in 2024 only 1.9 million for Johnson and 27,000 for Gove. So you'll see that our estimates are between 61% and 287% higher in terms of the net cost than KCTA's. On the next page, we talk a little bit about why that might be. So KCTA collected kind of bottom line totals, self-reported from the counties. We delved more deeply into the details. We looked at accounting records, we looked at invoices, things like that. So we had the benefit of more detailed data that we were able to sort of vet ourselves, which is part of why it's different. In the third sub-bullet there, right above conclusion, you'll see that they also used 2023 data that they then applied a 3% inflation rate to, which is reasonable given the consumer price index for that period. But we had the benefit of 2024 data, and there were some differences between 23 and 24 that couldn't be accounted for simply by inflation. Like, for instance, the Labette County Treasurer in 23 had 5 staff, and in 24 had 6 staff, and so that inflated their number for us. So we think KCTA's estimates were reasonable, their methodology was reasonable. We had the benefit of more granular, more updated data, and that's why it's a little different. We don't have any recommendations for anyone, as you can see at the bottom of page 14. And with that, I will answer any questions.
So one of my questions, and I've always struggled with this, I understand that the state does need to step up in this area, but when we talk about the costs for the registration in the county treasurer's office, how do you divvy up the labor hours? In other words, the personal property tax is collected at the same time as the registration fee is collected. How do you delineate that labor cost between the two?
So we had to estimate that. So obviously, like, a county treasurer's office is doing a lot of different things. So they're collecting ad valorem taxes, they are registering motor vehicles, they're doing other stuff that's not related to any of those. And they may not track, we found this during our work, they may not track what every single hour of staff time is devoted to. So we asked them to estimate that, how much of any given, each individual staff members, like the percentage of their hours that go to motor vehicle registration services, for instance. We felt good about their estimates because they generally aligned across the 3 counties. If there were any differences, they could speak to what those were from. And we also found that they aligned fairly well with what we heard from the County Treasurers Association when we met with them before sort of getting into the audit. So some of that is estimated.
So basically, if they're doing a routine registration, re-registration, like when I go in and do mine, you didn't make any allocation for part of it to be collection of personal property taxes. It was basically just based upon what they talked to you about.
We had no way of independently verifying like how they split up the hours of each individual staff member. So to some extent, we had to trust their estimates, but we compared them to the other counties and everything sort of aligned in a way that made sense to us.
You know, I know they've got some very intensive things that they do. Like, for instance, I've always thought that we haven't handled it right, that they get $2 when they do a new title on a vehicle, which takes quite a bit of time. Okay. The other question I have, did you specifically ask Gove County and the counties on the prosecution how much that they had collected in diversion fees?
Yes. So you can see the diversion fees on page 7 in
Right.
figure 2. The user fees and fines are primarily but not exclusively diversion fees. That line, there may be some other fees and fines that are wrapped in there, but that is the user fees and fines line on figure 2.
So that can vary drastically based upon the policy decisions of the county attorney and that.
Sure, they have total discretion over whether even to offer those.
Any other questions? Representative Sawyer.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to follow up a little bit on the chairman's questions. You know, I look at this on the motor vehicle registration, and you say the total cost was $8.3 million, the service revenue was $5 million. But, at the same time they're collecting that registration fee, they're also collecting the motor vehicle tax. It's all together. That motor vehicle tax, after this year, all of it will go to local units. None of it comes to the state. So to me, that function is really part of the county government's function. So to me, it seems like we're covering our costs in terms of our portion of this. And when you look at the local, local ad valorem tax collection, after this year, the state won't get any of that either. So to me, that's again, all part of the county's function. So I don't think we should, we're obligated to cover any of those costs.
Representative Tarwater.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't agree with that statement more. But they also collect 1.5 or 1.47% sales tax in Johnson County to help pay for all of this too, on a new vehicle. And so I'd like to find out, because I did some research on this and couldn't find exactly how much sales tax they collect annually on motor vehicles and or the property tax. They collect $1.8 billion about in property tax, but they don't break out the motor vehicle property tax. And so I'd like to know what they collect on property tax for motor vehicles, if that's something we could find out, because I think that will more than make up the difference in what they're collecting. And that's an annual thing. That's an every year thing, and most people just renew online, and they get the sticker in the mail, which is another way that I think we could cut costs, because we can get more towards that. We don't necessarily need all that manpower locally and all that. Currently we're mailing out the license plates, right? They're no longer doing that in the counties. They're not collecting them and handing them out. So I think we can cut some fees for the public. Thanks.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the audit. I do have a couple questions. It's along the lines of Representative Sawyer. Did you include in this audit the personal property items that were exempted that they're collecting for, that they will no longer be collecting for, and also the 1.5 mil of the state? Did you break any of that out or that consideration? Those both changed in statute this year.
Anything that would have changed in statute this year, we would not have accounted for because we were looking at 2024 specifically. So anything that's different for 25 or beyond would not be reflected in what we have.
Yeah, so I think that's a little actually a lot misleading. I would agree with Representative Sawyer that the state no longer collects those, so they're not collecting for the state in those circumstances at all. In fact, it should lower their cost on those personal property items. That was brought to us by the Appraisers Association so that they wouldn't be chasing those small personal items. They said it costs, in some circumstances, more to chase those than to actually get the property taxes on. And so that leads me to the other thing is on the ad valorem collections. Did you include the appraiser's office in this? We did not. You did not.
We saw that as a separate state mandated service that we didn't include.
You keep saying state mandated service, and I know that terminology is bantered around, but don't the counties exist because of state statute and constitution?
Yes.
Yes. So it kind of makes sense that we would oversee some of the functions of those counties. And did you address in this audit the differences of management style with these counties? Because even though it may be required by state law, there are different ways to implement these functions and different management styles. And there was a article a couple weeks ago that showed counties under 3,000. One county with 1,500 people population, around that approximately, was spending almost $1 million on their sheriff's office. I mean, so even though it's stuff that's mandated or whatever terminology you want to use, the state doesn't tell them how to manage or implement. Because with the appraiser's office, I don't think most people know that there doesn't have to be a county appraiser for each county. They can form an appraisal district, much like other districts that we allow too.
So I just wondered if you took any of that into account with this audit.
We did not take counties' different management styles into account, nor did we evaluate whether they were maximally efficient in the way that they executed these services.
Okay, and that could be a big question. Could that be some of the differences on page 13 for the post-audit estimates versus the KCTA estimates?
I don't think so, because we were looking at these specific counties, which are the same counties that they were looking at. So any management differences that may exist across the counties would be controlled for, because we're both us and KCTA are looking at the same 3 counties. So,
Okay, and if I may, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Also, the court system that they talked about being mandated at the state level to use, that wasn't the legislature that did that. That was the judiciary, the court system that required that. That wasn't anything that the legislature did.
it's the Odyssey court filing system. Yes, I believe that was the Office of Judicial Administration.
It was not, because I'm not a fan of some of those mandates that came down, but it was not something that came through the legislature. I just wanted people to be aware of that we did not force that. I understand that there's problems with it and that needs to be looked at, but maybe that is a legislative function, I don't know, working with the judiciary system. But also, Mr. Chairman, if I may, the movers system, absolutely, that definitely needs work. And that, again, the Department of Revenue that oversees that system. And I do know that that is being looked at. I know, Mr. Chairman, yourself and others are looking into how that functionality can be improved. And we do want to work with our counties to make this a more effective system so that we can lower cost for Kansans. But I have some more, but I'll save it. I'm sure others have questions too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does anybody else have any questions? Seeing none, I would just like to piggyback on what Senator Tyson said. Yeah, that mover system has some problems, and we need to figure out how we can address that, I think, moving forward. You know, when we hear these horror stories about some of our communities or some of our community members waiting hours to get a new car titled, it's something we need to help our partners in local government come to a solution with. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much. We have 2 agency responses, one from Gov County. Is anybody from Gov County here? Okay, seeing none. And then we also have the Johnson County Treasurer, Tom Franzen here. Tom, did you want to address the committee, or does anybody have any questions for Tom? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much. All right. Oh, yes, Senator.
May I have one follow-up question?
Sure.
On the audit. I just wanted to understand on page 11, the breakdown for the cost of services versus collection of services. So is this basically stating that they're just covering their cost by collecting overdue tax bills?
Are you looking at figure 4 on page 10?
Page 11, figure 5.
So this is a comparison. This is for all 3 services. We looked at what state law, like strictly speaking, what state law would require them to do, what they would have to do in order to meet the requirements in state law versus what they are actually doing. So an example of this would be in the bullets underneath figure 5. So Johnson County, for instance, spent an estimated $600,000 on its motor vehicle registration service beyond the sort of minimum required by statute. So that would include things like $225,000 to lease a second walk-in motor vehicle office. Strictly speaking, they would only have to have one office in order to comply with state law. They have a second one in order to provide their residents with more timely services. So that's a comparison between what they would have to spend to just meet state law and what they're actually spending.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is very interesting because they're covering their cost for the function. So they're wanting to actually, not completely, there's a minimal, but again, that could be the management style. But the counties are upset and they want to cover more than their cost. They want to make money off these functions.
So figure 5 is not comparing what they're spending with what they're receiving. That is in figure 3 for motor vehicles. That would be a comparison of their costs and revenues. So you can see there that they spent 8.3 million and kept 5 million.
So could you explain what figure 5 is then?
Sure. So we reviewed state law and figured out, strictly speaking, what they would have to do in order to comply with state law. So that would include things like having just one walk-in motor vehicle registration office for the entire county, or not doing like electronic payment options, things like that, like just to meet the basic requirements of state law. Those are the basic costs. The actual costs are what they actually spent. And in some cases, they're a little bit higher because they chose to do things like Johnson County has a second walk-in motor vehicle office. They have electronic payment options, things like that that cost extra money. In their estimation, they need to do those things in order to provide an adequate service. And I think that's borne out by the fact that even with those enhanced services, their wait time is still 3 hours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so this chart is somewhat misleading. So it is your estimate as to what their basic cost would be, and without looking at their management style or how this was implemented in detail.
This does not reflect an evaluation of whether every expense was appropriate or maximally efficient.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your work.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, and maybe this is more for Tom Franzen from Johnson County.
Tom, you thought you were going to get out of this, didn't you? By the way, thank you for coming in from Johnson County, and thank you for your service to our communities.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom Franzen, Johnson County Treasurer.
Yeah, I just, because we've had this discussion about the lapse in total costs, which they show user fees and fines. You collected 4.8 million, and then on the motor vehicle, and but the total service cost 7.9. So you've got a deficit of about 3 million in there. And what I'm trying to reconcile is the 3 counties collected a total of 34 million in motor vehicle registration fees, but we're only able to keep 4.8 million. Could you resolve that in my mind? Because it seems like that's a huge disparity. And I'm just kind of wondering where all those fees are going.
So just so I'm clear, you're talking about that last bullet on page 8, is that?
Correct. And it's talking about all 3 counties, but I'm sure you guys were a vast majority of that.
Yes, and happy to elaborate on that a little bit, Senator. So understand, treasurers are a point of service for collections from the community. We collect not just for local governments. We collect for state agencies, a number of state agencies. So that $34 million number are all the fees that we're collecting when someone comes to register a vehicle. And again, of the pie of the revenues collected, about 85% of those fees do not stay local. They go to the state. They go for law enforcement training. They go for registration fees. Keep in mind, the county treasurers get fractional elements of the fees that are charged. Most of that money goes to the state. And I think what the auditor was trying to point out with this bullet point was there's a lot of money coming through the system through the treasurers, but the treasurers don't keep much of that to fund the operation locally. Does that help?
don't think I have my mic on. In Johnson County, I know you do, if you don't get an appointment, you're going to be there a long time. And those places are absolutely full. And so, I mean, allowing the county to adjust the fees without the state having to kick in any money, would that be a good way to approach this problem, do you think? Or I'm just curious.
There's a number of things county treasurers are willing to work with the legislature on when it comes to trying to provide the service that's requested and required at the local level. So understanding that, this audit does a nice job of showing what that gap is currently under state mandated fees. What we're trying to do is find a solution where treasurers can provide the service that's needed, right? The service in Johnson County is a lot different than the service that's needed in Labette County or Gove or any of the other counties, right? And the treasurers are going to want to try and meet the customers to the extent where the customers are and what their needs are. Those are different needs across the state. In Johnson County, the labor market's totally different than the labor market here in Shawnee County, and it's different than in Sedgwick County. So when you stop and think about it, we've got a model that is very outdated. It's a one-size-fits-all model. And the reality of it is that's not our cost structure across the state. Our cost structures are significantly different. And if we could have a model that would allow local officials to go ahead and set the appropriate rates to meet their customers' needs, that probably goes a lot farther to being able to address what the auditor pointed out, which is Johnson County couldn't run one office and do it in a manner that would probably serve our constituents best. Right now, as you had mentioned, it's over 3-hour wait times on average. That's not the expectation we have for our community. Our key performance indicator was 1 hour, and that was a few years ago, but our population continues to grow. And with that, we have a stable staffing model. And it's because we can't spend more money on the staff because it's taking money away from other functions in county government. So our board tries to balance that by giving some money to the operation. But if you could set those fees locally, you really could meet that service level that the customers are wanting. And in our community, that's a growing need. And we do need more service outlets. We do need more staff to provide longer service times and get that wait time down. Is that helpful?
That is helpful. So, so the county kicks in fees to cover that gap. Is that coming from property tax?
Yes, ad valorem property tax.
Okay. All righty, thank you.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little history. I don't think everyone's aware. The House has been, as I was so eloquently informed, I mean, they've been really good. And the Senate, myself, and a few others have tried to help the treasurers out on this. I've tried for several years. I know Representative Smith has also. And we just keep hitting bottleneck after bottleneck. And we got creative this year, and they went through the Transportation Committee, and it wasn't creative enough. So we need to figure out a solution. I don't think there's anybody in disagreement that they need to cover the cost. But yeah, so we need to figure out that magic number. And I know a lot of people are looking into it, and we are looking into a different software system too. The Department of Revenue is doing some research for us, just so people know that this won't be dropped next year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else? Tom, since you're up here, I just have to ask, and I'm sorry, Mr. Treasurer, I should be a little more formal, but how do you deal with the fact, I mean, when you do a registration renewal, which is one of the easiest things you guys do, you're also, the vast majority of the money you're collecting is their personal property tax. Do you make any distinction when you're coming up with that $7.9 million? Do you allocate some of that labor to the property tax collection aspect, or do you just lump it all in on the registration?
You know, that's a really good question, Chairman. We've talked about this over time, and we do not break it out for the simple fact that the level of effort that goes into collecting that is insignificant compared to the level of effort that goes into doing the entire transaction. And the reason I say that is because the transactions are complex, right? If it's just a registration renewal, that's pretty straightforward. But keep in mind, when we're titling vehicles first time, we're also collecting sales tax for the state. There's a number of things that we're doing. So to split out the different elements of who we're collecting for doesn't make a lot of sense. I will tell you, we're confident with the numbers in Johnson County. We're not like some of the smaller counties where it's a blended staff function. I've got 70 FTE associated with motor vehicle operation. I've got those costs nailed down separately. I can tell you exactly how much we spend. Yes, there is an element of personal property tax collection, but the vast majority of that work is spent on doing the state's function.
And really, if we get down into it, it's that titling of vehicles, which is and I know early on, Mr. Franz and I have had these conversations for a number of years, and he had a very elaborate system where we tried to allocate the revenue and the costs more accurately to where they come, and it was just too complicated for everybody, to be honest.
It was good work, it just didn't get across the finish.
So, I hate to always, be the devil's advocate, so to speak, but thanks for your work on this.
Thank you for the time today.
All right, committee, any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to our next audit, which is options for acquiring state office space. Macy? And by the way, I found this to be a very interesting audit, so thanks for all of your work on it.
All right. Chairman Francis and members of the committee, again, my name is Macy Smith, and today I will present our state office space audit. Kristen Rottinghouse was the audit manager. Josh Luthai, Ellen Slicker, and Ty Bushbaum were team members. So we answered 2 questions for this audit. First, how much office space is owned or leased by the state, and how is that space being used? And then second, what cost-effective options are available for state agencies to acquire office space in Topeka? Overall, we found that state agencies reported having about 4.1 million square feet, that most of that space is actively being used by state employees, and that for state agencies in Topeka, the primary option for acquiring office space is to lease. So first, I'm going to walk you through a little background on the topic, how agencies acquire space, and some important things to know about our audit work. Then I will discuss how much office space agencies have and are using. And finally, we will move into options and costs for acquiring office space in Topeka. As background, and this information starts on page 4, state agencies need space for a variety of programs and missions. Some of that needed space is office space. There are 2 main options for acquiring office space. The first is to purchase a private building or build a new one. This can be done through outright buying or setting up a lease purchase agreement, which in essence is a rent-to-own contract where an agency agrees to purchase the property in the future. The second option is to contract with another party to lease office space. Here I want to note that the state itself owns 6 buildings: Curtis, Docking, Eisenhower, and Landon state office buildings, also Memorial Hall, and the new KDHE lab. State agencies can lease space from these buildings from the state, and this is managed by the Department of Administration. To actually acquire space, agencies decide what their space needs are, where they want to locate, and whether or not they want to lease or purchase a space. These processes vary depending on if an agency is leasing or purchasing office space, but the Department of Administration can facilitate if agencies want that. Then, before a lease is signed, the Department of Administration has to review and approve the agency's lease agreements with private landlords. And then for purchases, the legislature would approve that through the appropriations process. None of these processes or approvals require agencies to formally compare the advantages, disadvantages, and costs of leasing office space versus buying it. Now I am going to move into discussing our audit findings. But before I do, I want to let you know that our answers are based on information agencies reported to us for fiscal year 2025. We received information from all agencies, but that information is self-reported, which means there could be errors, but based on the work we did, we do not believe errors would significantly impact our overall findings. We also asked agencies to report all the office space they have. This would be locations that are exclusively office space. It also includes office space in state hospitals or correction facilities, office spaces off ks.gov garages, and also includes locations with a very small amount of office space. For example, the Kansas State Fair has a maintenance shop in Hutchinson where about 10% of that square footage is office space. A breakdown of individual agencies and how much space they lease or own can be found in Appendix B on page 22. Now I'll move to discussing the answer to the first audit question. If you are following along in the report, this starts at the bottom of page 6. I'm first going to describe how much office space state agencies lease and own, and then I'll describe how much of that space they're actively using. We found that across Kansas, state agencies reported owning or leasing around 4.1 million square feet of office space. Most of that office space is located in Shawnee County and is leased space. You can see this in figures 1 and 2 on page 7 and 8 of the report. Now, it's important to note that when we are talking about leased space, it is both space that agencies lease from private landlords and space agencies lease from the state through the Department of Administration. And as a reminder, those are going to be those 6 buildings I discussed earlier that included Landon and Docking state office buildings. Most state agencies lease space from a private landlord. This accounts for 1.8 million square feet. Then about 850,000 square feet is leased in state-owned buildings. At the bottom of page 8, you will see that the Kansas Department for Children and Families, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and the Kansas Department of Revenue leased the most office space. In addition to leased space, about 32% of office space is owned by state agencies. KDOT, the state hospitals, and the Department of Corrections own the most amount of office space. Finally, about 5% of office space was acquired through other arrangements. So this includes office space in the State Capitol Building and the Judicial Center, as well as office space provided by the federal government. Finally, it also includes office space in Lansing Correctional Facility, which has a lease purchase agreement. I'm now going to shift gears slightly and talk about how agencies use their space. And in the report, this starts on page 10 in about the middle of the page. I'm first going to describe how much office space state agencies reported they were actually using. State agencies reported that most office space is occupied. They reported that 16 of the 524 office space locations they own or lease statewide were unoccupied. Generally, when space had been unoccupied for longer than 5 years, this had to do with the condition of the location. 3 locations were reported as being unfit to occupy because of mold and asbestos. Overall, most office space that had been unoccupied 5 years or less ranged in size from a single office to a few cubicles. Officials reported that the space wasn't used because of staff vacancies or future plans to hire additional staff. Agencies had an average of about 375 square feet of office space per FTE. It is important to note that the 375 square feet are not the size of cubicles or an office. This is all the space within the office for the agency's exclusive use. So this is going to include hallways, conference rooms, even restrooms. Even still, that 375 square feet of office space per FTE is higher than the standards we reviewed. But we can't say if that's appropriate or not because we did not review each agency's individual circumstances. To determine this average of 375 square feet of office space per FTE, we looked at locations that were primarily office space only. This meant we excluded locations that had other primary purposes. So those would be like garages or state hospitals. So we looked at 196 of the 524 locations, and those 196 were primarily office space. I'm now going to discuss what agencies reported about the amount of office space they had to return all employees to work. Most agencies, and that's 70%, reported they had enough office space for all employees to work in the office. We only asked agencies if they had capacity to accommodate all employees to be able to work on site. We did not ask for further details about their response. 54 of 78 agencies reported that they had enough space for all employees to work in the office. 24 agencies said they did not. To wrap up question 1, we also calculated the average length of an agency's lease and the costs associated with breaking those leases. You can find that information on pages 12 through 13, but I'm not going to go through that piece in detail. I am now going to move on to question 2 and what we found about options for acquiring office space in Topeka in the report that starts at the bottom of page 13. As a reminder, this question is about what cost-effective options agencies have to acquire office space in Topeka. The short answer is that we couldn't compare costs to lease versus own space because nearly all agencies in Topeka lease space. But we did see a difference between leasing from private owners as compared to leasing from the state. For fiscal year 2025, 52 agencies in Topeka reported leasing office space, while only 6 reported owning office space. Then 4 agencies reported both owning and leasing space. This means we couldn't compare the cost of owning space to the cost of leasing space in order to help draw conclusions about which option might be more cost-effective. And additionally, many agencies have different space needs. So while it might be more cost-effective for one agency to lease, in another scenario, it could be more cost-effective to buy space. But I would also point to something I pointed to at the beginning of this presentation. Despite that there may be variance in agency office space needs and space availability, there is not a process in place requiring agencies to formally compare the advantages, disadvantages, and costs of leasing office space versus buying it. We also attempted to look at the cost of owning space by reviewing the costs for the state, not agencies, for 4 of the 6 office buildings the state owns. These were Curtis, Eisenhower, and Landon office buildings in Memorial Hall. However, we found the data from the Department of Administration was unreliable to determine the annual costs of owning space in Topeka. This information is found at the bottom of page 16. The Department of Administration used a series of spreadsheets to help determine the costs for these buildings, but our audit team identified a series of calculations and numbers that didn't make sense, and the Department of Administration officials couldn't explain. Officials told us they were unable to resolve these issues because they have had frequent turnover in finance staff. As such, we issued a recommendation to the Department of Administration to create a detailed instructions about how finance staff need to compile and calculate costs to operate state-owned buildings and how to calculate the state lease rate. The Department of Administration agreed with this recommendation, and you can see more details about that and the department's response on page 19. Instead of comparing leasing and buying costs, we compared the costs of leasing office space in the state-owned buildings to privately owned buildings in Topeka. If you look at figure 4 on page 15, what we found is shown. Leases for privately owned space generally cost less than leases for state-owned space in Topeka, and that was in fiscal year 2025. Now, again, for this work, we only looked at spaces that were office space only in Topeka. So we didn't include buildings primarily used for other purposes with just a little office space included. So we also looked at the fully loaded costs of leasing space. So these include items like parking costs or maintenance and housekeeping costs. We asked the Department of Administration why costs to lease from the state might be higher. They told us that the state lease rate includes costs to cover future building improvements. It also includes the costs of non-leasable space like cafeterias that are shared across agencies. And also that state agencies are provided services or amenities that private leasers may not provide. For example, agencies may have access to the fiber loop and virtual server platform managed by OITS. Finally, I want to draw your attention to page 17, where we discuss information about the office space in the newly renovated Docking State Office Building. About a quarter of the space in that building is office space. Department of Administration officials reported that the remaining portions of Docking State Office Building contained non-office space for things like a gym and a cafe, as well as the original power plant that remained in the basement levels of the building. They also reported there is another basement level that can't be leased as office space because it is used for building maintenance and cleaning crews. As of August of this year, Department of Administration planned for about 64,000 square feet of the 73,000 of square feet of leasable office space to be occupied by certain divisions of the Department of Commerce, the Department of Administration, and the Kansas Highway Patrol, as well as all Secretary of State divisions. The remaining 9,000 square feet of leasable office space was not assigned to an agency. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on page 11, you highlighted that when we look at the number of employees, you asked that question, how many employees are utilizing the space? And the result was 45 to 3,500 square feet per FTE, which is an average of 375. And then the bullet below says that standards are actually less than that, quite significantly less on some ends of that spectrum. So my question is, you provided some great charts. Did you have a chart that included the numbers, for example, the number of employees that were working on site, not field work, for each agency so that we could actually see? Because when I'm looking at page 23, the office space by state agency, I see costs higher, disproportionately higher and lower. And I know you said you can't necessarily compare because of how they're using this space, but I feel like we don't have, we need that information. And do you have it, and could you provide it?
So we asked them for an average number of FTE on site daily. So we have that number for the locations.
Okay, and I guess we actually, in appropriations, have the total number of FTE for each agency too, so it's not as if we couldn't come up with that. But I don't know how difficult it would be just to add one column that has the average or the number that they said on site for each location. Would that be too difficult?
I don't think so, running the numbers, but I would want to make sure that it made sense with the numbers that we have in this chart too, that it didn't misrepresent something.
Okay, and my reason for the question, Mr. Chair, is because we're moving into a new era of AI where less office work is going to be needed, as well as more people are working in the field or remote. And there was a proviso in our appropriations bill, Senate Bill 125, that required the executive branch to tell us exactly what percentage of employees are working remotely. So my point is, we built a new building, Docking. We put a lot of investment in it. We have a lot of open areas. And how do we know what good consolidation looks like if we don't know how each agency, Department of Education, is performing versus others in light of all of that? So that is my thinking. If we're going to be more efficient as we move forward, we really need to have some of those variables. Thank you.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the audit and your work. On page 15 with the plotting chart, I'm just curious as to who the two outliers are above the 25.40 line?
I would have to go look in our data to be certain. I don't want to misspeak.
We could get that, that'd be great. And then if I may, Mr. Chairman, I see a major flag here. The Department of Administration told you that one of the parameters that might result in a higher cost was access to Otis. Well, agencies and departments are already charged for that. So are they being double charged for Otis app? I mean, we've had problems with that before with OITS and how things are being charged at the state. And now if the department, if it's included in their rent and their fees, that could be a major problem, Mr. Chairman. A double charge.
I don't want to misspeak, so I would, the agency would be able to.
Yeah, as someone from the agency here, please come forward, introduce yourself, and if you can answer the senator's question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Frank Burnham, I'm the Deputy Secretary of Operations. I believe what we're referring to there is if you're at a state building or a state building that's adjacent to the fiber loop that's in place, you connect into that fiber loop like an open highway. If you're in a leased space off-site, you're then paying network connectivities to Cox Communications or someone to stand up your IT. So you have additional cost for connectivity versus being within the loop or within the network.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's not my question. My question is, are they being double charged?
I can't speak to how OITS charges for their services.
But if they're being charged for their rent and they're being charged by OITS, they're being double charged.
Excuse me, let me make sure I answer your question here. If you're staying in the Capitol complex, you're charged rent by the Department of Administration. You are also charged independently by OITS for the connectivity charge for every single connection point you have within your office. That is a separate cost outside. I'm going to guess that when you're paying a lease rate outside in Shawnee County, you're paying your rent rate to your landlord and you're paying an additional cost for your connectivity.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, one more time. The committee was told that if they are renting or leasing a state facility, that part of that expenditure, why it's higher than other buildings, is because the OITS charge is included. Is that correct?
I don't have access to exactly what was said there, so my apologies.
Okay. That's not correct.
Hey, Frank, I might have a question, or Macy may be able to answer this. Did I cut you off? Did you want to go farther? I'm sorry.
No, they didn't answer the question.
Go ahead.
My understanding, and Frank kind of refreshed my memory, is it was a benefit, was that they had access to that where they were not maybe be charged like they would be to connect or have to pay extra IT fees.
Mr. Chairman, I think we've got a problem. We need to clarify this. There have been audits on how OITS is charging. If they're charging different fees for whether you're in the building or not in the building, that could be a major problem. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Am I leaving anybody? I had a question. I guess when I look at the chart on page 15, figure 4, and I'm looking at the 2540 square foot average state lease in Topeka. So all of those leases include the 330 legacy, or maybe that's not the right word. What was the 330 legacy charge or monumental building, yeah, surcharge? Does that 2540 include that fee?
Yes, and also state agencies leasing in Shawnee County outside of the state. So private leases are also paying that fee as well. And so that is included in these numbers.
So let me ask you a question then. Is it a fair assumption to assume that if we took that 330 off that 2540, we wouldn't be above the norm, or am I misunderstanding?
All of these dots here are represented locations in Shawnee County. So they all have the monumental fee included in there.
They all
So
have that.
if we took it off that 25, we'd have to take it off everybody else's.
Okay. And then Frank, so do you know what the rationale is behind the 330 to support the judicial and the Capitol complex? Do you know what the original thinking on that number was?
Yeah, so it's actually, Mr. Chairman, it's a monumental surcharge. So we no longer charge for employee parking, for example. As Basie said in her presentation, we don't charge rent for the State House, for the cost of the grounds for Cedar Crest and Judicial Center. So we take that cost and we divide that amongst all people leasing or owning property in Shawnee County to make sure we're able to cover that cost, and that cost is spread across those agencies.
So in essence, it would kind of make it look like renting in Topeka for an agency would if you rent in Topeka or Shawnee County, your rental costs are higher because you have to support those other agencies.
That's accurate.
Correct? Okay. I don't know that I agree with that thought process there. Yeah, I'm not sure I get that, but was that when was that policy implemented? Do you have any idea?
I don't have the exact date. I know it's been at least 8 years. Looking back is about when we stopped charging parking for employees.
Yeah, and I just don't understand why we're charging like somebody that might be out on Wanamaker, because we've done away with parking in this area.
Again, it's the cost associated with maintaining the State House, the grounds, the heat, and everything that's associated with running the government here in Shawnee County.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions? Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the information. How come the building data wasn't reliable as reported in the audit on page 16?
So thank you, Senator, for that question. First of all, the process we went through with LPA, I want to hats off to the questions that were asked. It really kind of helped open our eyes into some really old, antiquated ways of calculating and determining what these costs are. Every year, we just kind of sit down and we try to calculate what was our actual cost. We try to guess at what the heat load is going to be for the following year and just try to determine what that number is. And so there's a series of pulling information from multiple sources. There isn't one single consolidated way of extracting that information. So through this audit process and through talking with my team is when we discovered that this has just been a series of people in spreadsheets trying to calculate this. So it's something that we are committed to improving upon and finding a way to really extract that information from an actual accounting source and then make more informed decisions. Our ultimate goal as Department of Administration would be able to establish at least a multi-year rate or a flat rate. Things are going to continue to go up. I can't commit to saying our rate is going to go down, but providing some consistency across the board. There's also a matter of just a lot of unknowns with docking coming online. We've got a lot of agencies moving around, which means we're not leasing space. So we were anticipating that we might be short this year, which is why the monumental surcharge, I think it was a 20-30% increase this year. Once we level out and we understand kind of what our true costs are after 1 year's actual operating cost, we'll be able to bring that back down and create a more stable number.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, there's a few concerns, but when you are looking at this, would you review, like, I don't know why this has gone on for years, but the Department Secretary of Agriculture has 2 offices, one in Manhattan, one in Topeka. I mean, little things like that are just kind of ridiculous, especially as a taxpayer looking at that. So would you add looking at and finding efficiencies in that charge that you're working on? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Senator Tarwater.
Thanks for being here. And I'm still trying to get my arms around the surcharge thing. That's basically the state allocating money. The state's paying itself. And So it's just more or less an allocation, because it's just moving it from one agency into a pot of money that pays for other things.
Sir.
Okay. One of the things I asked the auditors to look at was the leases, what the buyout would be on some of them, because I know some of them are very long-term leases, and we may or may not need that space, especially with the new building that's coming on, or new buildings that are coming on. Was that looked at on what the buyout was on some of these long-term leases that we may not need anymore?
Trying to grab where it's at in the report real quick for you. Page 13, we looked at that to an extent, if I'm in the right spot. And yes, so the second bullet down on page 13, we did touch base on that, and the agencies reported the other 10% of the 241 private leases assessed a penalty for breaking the lease. We didn't dig into each of those leases, but there was a penalty for some of those. And that bullet point talks about that range.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So on, some of our leases that might be 40 or 50-year long leases, or even in perpetuity, we don't know what it would cost to get out of those if we were to say, okay, we're going to default on that lease and go ahead and pay off whatever penalty it is. It's just.
So the next point, as of July 2025, it would cost agencies a collective $16.5 million to break their current leases.
Okay, so you do have that information somewhere broken down by lease?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Could you get that to us?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Macy. All right, committee, the next item on our agenda is the follow-up audit, and Ellen. Welcome to the committee, Ellen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Ellen Slicker, and I'm presenting the 2025 follow-up audit. I was a supervisor for this audit, and Katrin Osterhaus was the manager. These follow-up audits are where we go back and look at recommendations from past audits and check whether or not agencies have implemented them. In this particular one, we followed up on 9 recommendations from 4 audits that we released in 2023 and 2024. In each case, the agency or entity told us that the recommendations were implemented or were in progress. Then we talked to them and asked more questions to reach our own conclusion. And we only assessed whether agencies implemented the recommendations, not the effectiveness or any outcomes. We determined that 4 recommendations were fully implemented, 4 were partially implemented, and 1 was not implemented. The first one we followed up on, an audit of groundwater management districts, starts on page 4. The original audit reviewed the operations of Kansas's 5 groundwater management districts. These are local government entities that help guide groundwater management but have limited independent authority. State law only requires them to maintain a management program that describes the district, identifies concerns, and outlines related programs, and to review it annually. In it, we found all 5 districts had management programs as required, but not all conducted annual reviews. So we recommended that they create a written policy for when and how they'd revise their management programs. Figure 1 on page 5 shows we determined that the recommendation was implemented. Districts 1, 2, 3, and 5 now have similar written policies to review their management programs annually. District 4 has a policy to review their management program annually, but it isn't written down in the same way as the others. They were the only district in the original audit that was already reviewing and revising their management program regularly, and we saw evidence that they've continued to do so. The second audit we followed up on was about the Rural Opportunity Zones program, and it starts on page 5. The program consists of 2 incentives intended to slow rural depopulation: a student loan repayment assistance program administered by the Department of Commerce, and an income tax credit administered by Revenue. An issue we found in that audit was that Commerce and Revenue did not have any way to match participants who used both incentives in the program. So we recommended that they develop a way to do so. And what we saw in our review was that the recommendation has been implemented. Both agencies now collect the Social Security numbers of participants. Our work on the third audit starts on page 6 and the figures on page 8. We followed up on recommendations from part 2 of our 2023 election security audit. That audit looked at whether Kansas counties had adequate election security procedures. The Secretary of State administers state elections, but each county has their own election officer who oversees local elections and sets their own security policies, which led to a lot of variation statewide. The original audit compared 15 counties to best practices and state laws, and some issues we found were inconsistent policies across counties, no county had adequate written policies, and little proactive guidance from the Secretary of State's office. We followed up on 3 recommendations to address those issues. The first recommendation was for the Secretary of State to create sample election security policies and forms for counties to use if they wanted, and consider adapting the practices of stronger counties for statewide use. Through our work, we saw that the Secretary of State has shared example election security forms, reports, and checklists with the county officers. The reason that we determined it was only partially implemented is that none of these forms were readily usable and none of them were policy templates or examples. The second recommendation to the Secretary of State was to use annual or new certification training to teach county election officers about key election security laws and baseline best practices. Upon reviewing their annual new certification training presentations, we found this recommendation was implemented. However, we found the third recommendation was not implemented. That one was for the Secretary of State's office to provide guidance to county election officers on what materials should and should not be sealed in ballot containers. We made this recommendation because the original audit found 2 counties sealed all their 2022 election documentation in the same containers as the ballots, in conflict with state law. The reason for our determination of not implemented is that though officials told us that they provided a copy of the law and held discussions with the county election officers in meetings, there was no documentary evidence. And we also expected written guidance clarifying the law, which could be distributed to all county election officers, not just verbally.
Can we just hold up, since that's the first one that we had any non-compliance with? Does anybody have any questions regarding this for Ellen? Okay, is there anybody from the Secretary of State's office here? Okay, all right, carry on then. Oh, go ahead, Senator.
Sorry, it takes me a second. I'm a little slow today. Thanks, Ellen. Is there any indication that they're going to rectify this situation? The not implemented, because that was probably the most important thing that we were concerned over, is the fact that that information, we couldn't audit what was already sealed. You can provide them information, but if any kind of response at all.
They did provide a response. It's on page 12. It's at the very end. And so you can take a look at what they had to say there.
Okay. So in other words, they just send them a note and hope that they follow it next time, right? What it sounds like.
It does say they'll provide an update, specifically referencing the state statute.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, with all the interest in elections, it seems like that would have been an easy one to comply with, but all right, let's go on.
The final audit we followed up on starts on page 9, and the figure with our determinations is on page 10 and goes on to page 11. Our audit evaluating the Department of Revenue's processes related to motor vehicle sales taxes found that KDOR lacked key procedures to ensure that counties remit taxes, and its movers database contained too many data errors to do a reliable statewide analysis. KDOR also hadn't posted tax guidance for dealers in its portal and lacked written internal procedures. Our first recommendation to KDOR was to create and implement 2 ways to monitor and enforce county compliance. We saw that KDOR has done the first one. They developed a report to identify counties with outstanding sales tax balances and have a procedure to follow up with those counties each month. The second part of the recommendation was to use registration data to flag questionable exemptions. And KDOR has also started a pilot program to identify suspicious tax exemptions for commercial vehicles and told us that they plan to move that process to personal vehicles next. For that reason, we found the recommendation was partially implemented. The second recommendation was to implement a process to improve the accuracy of vehicle registration data in the movers database. KDOR's self-reported status for this one was in progress, and we agreed that the recommendation is partially implemented. We learned that KDOR created a new report addressing the data reliability concerns of the original audit and is working with counties and their IT department to improve data accuracy. The third recommendation was for KDOR to post current sales tax guidance in the dealership portal, update it regularly, and consider offering periodic retraining for dealers. And we saw that KDOR has implemented this recommendation. We saw tax guidance documents in the portal and recent portal update notifications. We also saw the dealer licensing guide in the portal, which KDOR told us allows the dealers to retrain as needed. And finally, we recommended that KDOR should formally document all existing and new procedures related to motor vehicle training, guidance monitoring, and enforcement. And while we saw written policy documents for their new procedures, the reason we determined that it was only partially implemented is that KDOR has not yet documented all existing internal processes, especially around employee roles and responsibilities, and that was an issue specifically identified in the original audit. We didn't make any new recommendations because this was a follow-up audit, and the Secretary of State was the only agency that provided a written response, as you saw on page 12. And with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions from the committee.
All right, anybody have any questions for Ellen? I see we also have individuals from the Department of Revenue here. Does anybody have any questions for them? Zach, or whoever is from Revenue, could you come forward? Oh, we've got Kathleen. You should have sent Zach.
I should have. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Kansas Department of Revenue.
Yeah, so are you guys working on completing the implementation of these things, or are there some of them that you don't feel like you can implement in a timely basis?
No, I believe that our opinion is some of these probably already have been implemented, specifically with the movers report. We don't believe that there is a duplication of data. We have reworked the report, and we're now reporting one line per transaction, so we think we have taken care of that. But we can discuss it and review it further. As far as the internal processes, we are continuing to review those and get those completed as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, thank you very much. All right, committee, next item on the agenda is a 10-minute break. So let's take a 10-minute break and be back in here about 2:35. Okay. Let's get started again. Next on the agenda is the KDHE IT monitoring. Katrin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. You should have a 6-page memo as part of your package in your binder for this project. And to start out, just as a reminder, this IT monitoring report is a little bit different from our audits that we typically do, which are more retrospective. So in this case, these are ongoing monitoring activities for a particular IT project. So our statute directs us to conduct such continuous audits to identify as early as possible when a project is at risk of failure due to scope, schedule, cost, or quality issues. In January 2024, this committee authorized us to monitor the Early Childhood Data Integration and System Enhancement Project. The system will replace the outdated Child Care Licensing and Regulation Information System. 2 agencies are actually collaborating on this IT project, KDHE for child care licensing and the Department for Children and Families for foster care. This includes associated processes for facility inspections, background checks, renewals, complaints, and so forth. In January 2024, KDHE did sign a $4.3 million contract with a vendor to create a licensing solution using software as a service. So next I'm going to go over the results, and I'm going to go to page 2 if you follow along, talking a little bit about scope. This area we still find to be in satisfactory situation, and it has been satisfactory the entire time, so not really a problem here, even though there were some pretty big changes happening in the second quarter. Specifically, the 2025 legislature had passed a bill that created a new agency, the Office of Early Childhood, and so this definitely impacted this project. It affected the project in that it necessitated 2 changes to the project, and both parties approved those changes recently. In all, the project did have 19 change orders so far, some smaller without cost implications and some larger. Both parties did use a formalized change control process to suggest, discuss, and decide changes, and that is why we rated this area as satisfactory. And now I'll move on to cost next, and you'll find that information on page 2. We found cost to be in caution, and this is the same rating as last quarter. KDHE received a $5 million federal grant, and the initial cost estimate for this project was $4.4 million, which did leave a little bit of a cushion. The current project estimate is now at $5.2 million, and that includes the initial $4.3 million for the contract, plus the various change orders and the additional monitoring costs through the Kansas Information Technology Office. KDHE is monitoring the costs closely and only makes payments for services that were actually received. So at this point, only $2.4 million have actually been expended. KDHE is moving some funds around to cover the increased cost. With the current estimate now over the federal grant and a bit of the concern that to ensure that the federal funds must be used before the grant expires, we did rate this as caution. I'll move next to schedule. That is on page 4 if you follow along. We found that schedule is in alert, and this is the first time that we're moving this particular area into alert, so that's the red in your memo. The project had already been recast once, and originally it was supposed to be done by October 2025. That was pushed back to early March of 26. During the second quarter, a lot of the tasks had been slipping, and the legislative changes that I mentioned earlier resulted in further schedule slippage. At the start of the third quarter, so the quarter that we're talking about now, the parties did agree to a new completion date of early June 2026. However, that plan is neither complete nor realistic. And that's because the schedule does not include all of the work, and the discussions with stakeholders include various tasks are behind already. So during the audit, as part of the quarterly monitoring, we sit down with the stakeholders, and we have interviews, and everybody agreed that things are already pretty much off track in some areas. Additionally, the user acceptance work that has started does appear to be vastly under-scheduled, given the results of the first 2 weeks of that testing. Because of those issues, we consider the schedule and alert status at this time. The last area that I want to talk about is quality, and that starts on the bottom of page 4. We found quality and caution for the first time in our monitoring work. We say that for 2 main reasons. Number 1, user acceptance testing that I've mentioned earlier has detected over 600 defects during the first 2 weeks. State officials also said that they did not have sufficient insight into the remediation of those bugs so far. Second, we think that security compliance has not received sufficient attention at this point. The contract includes a number of security assurances, and during this reporting period, KDHE officials actually have seen the vendor's SOC report, so that's good. But again, UAT has identified missing security groups, which really at this point should have been discussed months ago and should be part of the build at this point. And overall, I would say security should become a higher priority at this stage, and that's because proactively identifying any security risks helps to make sure that things don't become more expensive and extensive as the project moves forward, and you might have to re-engineer some things. I will note that we continue to find a separate finding on the Kansas Project Approval Reporting System, and that's because the system that the Kansas Information Technology Office uses to approve and monitor projects for all sorts of agencies is not currently always working. So even in this quarter, we again found some intermittent scenarios where the links on the website didn't work for us. And this had been pointed out before in previous reports. And it's not necessarily for this system alone, it's for other projects as well. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Katrin, didn't we talk to Keto about that CARS project? Didn't they kind of tell us what was wrong with it and what they were doing to fix it, or am I misremembering?
I don't believe that we formally talked about it in any other meeting so far.
Okay, have they gave you any reasons or rationales on why we continue to have problems with it?
Not officially, no.
Okay, all right. Anybody else have any questions on the Representative Tarwater?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the report. So is this on the state? Did we change our mind on what we were looking for midstream after the project started, or did things change because of the software issues after it started?
I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all answer. These change orders, and I mentioned there's 19 of them, they all came in, again, throughout, this year and a half that we've been monitoring the project, and each one of them really is legit. There are things that sometimes people don't anticipate going into a project, so if they do see something that needs to be fixed, and again, I've seen them all, they all make sense, but sometimes you can't anticipate things. The 2 specifically that come from the big legislative change, one of them did cost quite a bit of money because things had to be redone. A lot of the forms and the processes had been established, only to, all that happened to be changed again. So that is a legitimate cost that nobody saw coming. So I'm sorry to say, I don't think there is a really good one-size-fits-all answer on those. We can certainly go over the individual change orders if you care to see those.
Okay, so, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Outside the legislative change, when you say no one could anticipate these issues, did we choose a software company that had no experience? I mean, you would think that they would have brought us a pitch and a product for something that fit and would have anticipated all these changes. And then my last question would be, are there penalties for dragging it out? Do we have contractual deadlines that they have to hit, and if they don't, do we pay them less?
So this is a fixed price contract. So aside from the change, and I do appreciate the concerns on that side, aside from those, really payments happened based on the deliveries. So there's really nothing that at this point has to do with time because the work needs to get done. But the state has created the contract in a way that we do not pay until we have the delivery of the item. The problem is really that it's taking much longer than anticipated. And for that, I think the one thing that was a little bit anticipated was that for items and tasks and business cases to be established, there was very little time in the contract, and I think I spoke to that in another committee, in that there was only a 5-day review period. And really, that's what, for the most part, didn't work out as foreseen.
Any other questions for Katrin? Senator Tyson.
Katrin, thank you for the audit. I understand Representative Tarwater's concerns, and that it just seems like the scope creep is somewhat considerable, but I would say as big a concern, or maybe even larger, is the security not being addressed, especially with KDHE and some of the data that they house. Is that should have been part of the scope? Why is that off target? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Was there a question in there for me? That is something that we had pointed out from the get-go, that there is really no deliverable that is tied to security. I know initially the contract had, and still does, of course, have lots of pieces and components about the vendor certifying and asserting that there will be lots of security. But at this point, we really we're kind of hitting critical mass, and somebody needs to make sure that those pieces and bits are all incorporated, and we have assurances. And I believe when we sat down with KDHE, they agree that needs to be, it needs to be done. Right now, I think the consensus is they have bigger fish to fry, with UAT kind of going off the rails a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, could you explain UIT going off the rails, and how is security not a priority with everything that we've been looking at with the legislature? I'm really concerned over this.
And really what I would like to do is also have the agency have a chance at some of the questions, but I will try to explain UAT essentially for the first 2 weeks that we actually incorporated into this quarter, even though we're talking about October 1st to October 15th. In those 2 weeks, there was quite a lot of bugs that have been identified, over 600 of them, and that was not anticipated. And that said, I think the bigger problem that state officials have told me about is that those bugs, all of them, really have not been categorized at the time. So really it's unknown as to, are these big things, are they small things, can they be fixed, can they not be fixed? And the contractor right now hasn't really allowed state agency officials to be part of that conversation. And so I think that right now is a bigger hurdle. They do fully understand that security does need to be addressed, but rather than starting to throw up yet another ball in the air, they want to try to understand and get a hold of UAT a little bit better.
You done? Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With 60 days for user acceptance, and I think it's 15 days for corrections and only 5 days to for verification, is that going to be enough with 600 issues found in the first 2 weeks?
Our assessment is no, and I think KDHE would agree. It's very short and probably not realistic at this time.
Thank you.
And Katrin did say that we have individuals from KDHE here. Does anybody have any questions for KDHE? Okay, Senator Tyson, we have someone from KDHE here that can maybe answer some questions or address some concerns. Just state your name and your title, please.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Derek Florlock. I'm the Bureau Director for Family Health at KDHE, so child care licensing is within my bureau. So I'll let Mr. Bob Doan come up and maybe talk about the security piece, but I want to say that a lot of the things that Katrin's brought up, we are obviously aware of, and we're working with the vendor to make sure that we get solid and concrete answers. I think one of the issues is follow through in that communication. So in the meantime, we've tried to put together additional sort of executive level check-ins with the actual, C-suite leadership of the contractor itself. So you'll find Bob and myself in those meetings making sure that we have very distinct items checked off the books. And it's quite simply not enough for us to just be told what they're going to do. We also need concrete due dates with those as well. So I do want to let you all know we've requested a revised schedule multiple times now. At this point, I think we've outright demanded that. We're putting in a due date for that of December 1st. We'll review that schedule as it's been brought up, the UAT, the user acceptance testing. We need appropriate time on both ends to do the work. On the other item concerning the number of bugs that have been found, the 600 bugs that have been found, we've requested and we will do this with the vendor. We're going to sit down with them collaboratively and actually go line by line on those and categorize them and prioritize them. One of the thoughts is that are some of those bugs so critical to the business operation, the business application of the system? Is that something that we need right now? Are there other areas that we can prioritize to fix and make this system go live in an appropriate time frame for the program itself? We do have a devoted senior workflow architect from the vendor too. They've been put on and they've been a great help as of lately. We had an email from them that provided us very direct next steps that we received on November 6th. So gosh, just last week, I guess. And then we responded with that. Again, the next steps that we had, it was good context, good information on the next steps that we need to take regarding the solutions to address some of this, but we wanted due dates with those as well. So I did respond to them with that on the 7th, the very next day, to which they agreed to those due dates yesterday. So we'll hold them to those due dates. As Katrin said, we only pay based on deliverables, so we do have an opportunity to ensure that we're being delivered what we expect as outlined in the scope and outlined in the contract before we pay for it. And I can pause there for any questions regarding like the business application report.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm out on the dashboard. What's the name of the project so that we can get the details on this?
Oh gosh, the dashboard name, I'm not, it's because it's.
Yeah, this is really hard for legislators to track.
Yeah.
We get a 30-second soundbite and we need to be able to look on the dashboard to see.
It's something different other than what we refer to it
Exactly.
internally. Yeah.
Katrin,
KDHE Early Childhood Data Integration and System Enhancement IT Project, I believe. 2. Version 2.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you, yeah, I don't understand, I don't want to micromanage your projects, but there's a lot of flags here. I mean, only 2 weeks that doesn't even make sense for a project to put that in the schedule. I don't understand what's going on and why so many issues. Obviously, I don't know who your vendor is or any of that. That's why I was trying to look at the dashboard to see what's going on here.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I can't say the vendor does have experience in licensing systems, and they've since been rewarded some additional projects in other states as well. So, we've wanted to make it clear to them that we need the focus for them to be Kansas, to be this KDHE DCF joint project, to get this done. That's been made crystal clear to their leadership. They've assured us of that. We've even gone so far as for them to tell us, we have this number of staff dedicated to it. The initial schedule plan and testings was very, very aggressive. And, we've realized that. And so we're going into this next sort of phase, evaluating the review of the bugs, evaluating this next form of the schedule, and I think understanding where we've been and not wanting to revisit that moving forward.
So I don't know, maybe the chairman of JCIT or vice chairman at this time would be able to address this, but this is the first that we're hearing this project being brought to this degree is because of the audit. So would we even know as a legislature of these issues? Or I don't know, maybe you did present in JCIT and I didn't see, but this seems pretty egregious right now. And why would we select a vendor that has no experience with the licensing system?
Senator, I can let Mr. Bob Doan speak to that. I think we've done a couple presentations, but I will.
Okay, maybe you have, and I missed the fact that you picked a vendor that had never done a licensing system before. Was that stated to JCIT?
My name is Bob Doan. I'm the CIO for KDHE.
Thank you. I thought he just said they didn't have experience in a licensing system. Did I hear him wrong?
Yes, sorry, Senator, I can clarify. They do have experience in licensing systems in various other states, and they've since been rewarded other contracts to do the same. I believe Oklahoma just as recently as a couple of weeks ago. So again, part of our discussion with them was that's great for you, but we need the focus for the purpose of our project to remain on Kansas. So we had an experience several months ago where some staff were taken off the project. That was addressed then. We need them to remain on it. And then since then, there's been additional conversations with leadership from the vendor that has expressed to us just the number of their own FTE that are on this project too. So we've gone as far as to, ask about the number of folks that are working on it. There's a number of meetings that are occurring regularly every week, check-in meetings between myself and Bob and leadership from KDHE and leadership from the vendor, as well as your boots on the ground kind of project management and business application licensing staff.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, are there any penalties with the contract for them not succeeding? I understand they're not paid if they don't deliver, but are there any penalties?
Thank you, Senator. No, I do not believe there are any penalties built into the contract. We could, in theory, withhold payment. Again, we don't pay until we receive on those, but I do not believe there are any penalties built into the verbiage of the contract.
Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to the next item on the agenda. All right, next item on the agenda is audit recommendation report from Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I will be brief, but my name is Matt Etzel. I'm going to be going over our audit recommendation follow-up process for you all today. As a quick reminder, committee rules require us to follow up with agencies that have active audit recommendations. So we do this twice a year for any agency that has a recommendation between 6 months and 2 years old. That information that they provide us is self-reported, but it does give us a general sense of how agencies are doing in their process to implement our recommendations. You should all have a memo in front of you that summarizes sort of how many agencies we are monitoring currently and how many audit recommendations each one of those agencies have. So as you can see on that memo, we are currently monitoring 31 audit recommendations across 8 state agencies. As of right now, agencies reported having implemented 23 of those 31 audit recommendations, with the 8 remaining recommendations being labeled as in progress. We do have more information in terms of a breakout of audit recommendations by agency, as well as a brief description on the current status for each one of those recommendations on our website. We will be sending out an email very shortly notifying you that that table on our website is updated with the most current audit recommendation information. But yeah, that is, my presentation. I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Do we have any questions for Matt? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the triennial audit plan. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are in the section of the meeting where we have a number of administrative items we have to get through. These are all required by either statute or committee rule that have to be done before the year end. So, okay, so I am going to have you turn to tab B in your notebooks for the triennial audit plan. This happens every 3 years. State law requires that we post-audit conduct work at each state agency at least once every 3 years. Kansas currently has more than 75 individual state agencies, so How we plan to meet that requirement is primarily through three means: through our IT security audits. This work includes a survey of all state agencies, so we do touch them all through that work. That helps us evaluate how much sensitive data they maintain and to evaluate their risk. Our IT audits evaluate specific security practices in specific agencies. And during the 3-year period, we estimate these audits will cover between 16 and 75 state agencies or school districts, depending on choices you guys are going to make here in a moment. Next item is through our data mining, analysis, and follow-up. We use a variety of analytical techniques to review all agencies' credit card transactions. We plan to follow up with agency officials on questionable transactions to determine if they represent fraud, abuse, or waste. And finally, we meet this requirement through our performance audits. During a 3-year period, we estimate we'll conduct roughly 40 performance audits. And we can't estimate how much additional audit coverage this work will provide on an agency-by-agency basis, but it helps increase our audit coverage statewide. And then, for example, the audit that you heard today on agencies' office space, that was a statewide audit, and we contacted all 80 state agencies for information. So that helps us meet this requirement as well. So I would like the committee to either approve or modify this plan for our looking ahead for the next 3 years.
All right, does anybody have any questions for Chris regarding this item? Representative Tarwater.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So this is a statutorial deal that you have to do every 3 years. Does it take up a lot of time? Is this another one of those things that we need to look at, maybe changing if it's not functional?
As long as you're okay with our proposed plan here, it's fine. It took me 10 minutes to make this memo. It happens once every 3 years.
Any other questions? Representative Williams.
Yes, thank you. So on the second item, the second bullet about the data mining and all agency credit card transactions, that's something you have access to. You're able to, that's amazing. That would be, we would love to know a little bit more about that personally, because we've been going through the SMART system and looking at transactions, and we have so many questions about where transactions are going. They're not all credit card by any means, but just having that alone would be remarkable. So I would be very curious for a follow-up on that. Great.
Okay. Any other questions? Is there a motion? Senator Thompson.
Thank you. I move we approve our triennial audit plan.
Is there a second? Second by Senator Peterson, motion by Senator Thompson. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Motion carries. Okay. Now we are to item C. We have Katrin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So I'm here to present the 2026 IT, security plan, right? Yes. C. So state law does require us to...
Katrin, could you hold just a second? I want to see if Senator Tyson wants to be in here. This is kind of in her wheelhouse of stuff.
I can, if you would like for me to switch to the monitoring one, which she might also want to be interested in.
Yeah, we just probably need to get her in here. I hate to leave someone out that has a real interest in a certain aspect of what we do. I'll go. I thought maybe Dave was doing it, but I'll go check. All right, and so we are on item annual IT security plan, and it is tab C, Senator. Okay. All right, go ahead.
All right, so state law does require us to conduct audits as directed by the IT security audits, I should say, as directed by you all. You will find the memo that I'm going to be talking from in tab C in your notebook. Committee rules also require us to conduct a statewide risk assessment, and Chris has kind of alluded to the fact that we touch all state agencies through that process. We use that mostly to also inform us like which agencies to pick when we do set up our new IT schedule for the year. That said, in this year, we are actually proposing 3 different options for you to choose from when it comes to our IT security audits in the form that we're going to be using. So option A is kind of the tried and true current style option. Under this option, we would perform 6 to 8 comprehensive IT security audits on selected state agencies using our confidential report format. So you know this one, you've been through that. You know, we have the executive meeting, we pass out the red binders. So that would be kind of the status quo option. We would focus on high-risk agencies that had not been audited in the past 4 to 8 years, and if desired, we could also include a school district. This is something that you all had instructed us to do at a ratio of 4 to 1 in the past. So again, that is kind of bonus option for you on that one. Option B is essentially the same thing, but rather than focusing on state agencies, we thought maybe we should look at counties and cities as well. So under that option, again, we would perform about 6 to 8 comprehensive audits, but they would be on counties or cities. And if we did, if you all chose that particular option, we would first go about doing a survey to find out if there's any volunteers for that. And then once we have volunteers chosen, we'd come back to you, to this committee, and let you all decide which particular city or county to choose from. Option C is completely different in that here we are suggesting to perform 3 to 4 performance audits. Those would be focused on IT issues, but they would be resulting in public reports. Because as you all know, sometimes we kind of vacillate between the security and the confidentiality and the public need for information on that topic. So here, if you look at the second page there, you do see some example topics, and I will maybe note that these topics are not necessarily fully vetted, they're not fully fleshed out. So if you did choose that particular option, we would then take some time to plan at the end of this year and come back to this committee to present really fully fleshed out proposals for you to choose from. So again, those were the 3 options, and the committee would need to decide whether to approve or modify and approve any of those options A, B, or C. For the 2026 IT security plan. I will note for option A, we would need to know whether you're interested in the school district option. For option B, we would be interested to know and want you to clarify if you wanted us to focus on cities or counties or a mix. And that's kind of the explanation, and the rest is for you to discuss.
All right, committee. Does anybody have any questions for Katrin, or do we want to just have conversation on which item to proceed with? Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I probably would look at a hybrid, an option D, if you would, that maybe pulls from A, maybe 1 or 2 from B, and then as the committee saw fit, maybe 1 or 2 from C. But I'm not a fan of doing an all or nothing on A, B, or C.
Okay, and if you were interested in doing a D, which 2 of C would you be most interested in?
Well, I'm not I don't, on C, I don't know. I would probably look at the evaluation, since we are looking at security, more of the ransomware attacks would probably be one of the items I would focus, but I don't know. I'd leave it up to the committee.
Which one of those would be most tied to ransomware? 4? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. Okay. There's the word. Okay. Other comments and discussion? Senator Peterson.
Kind of like the idea of a blended one between A and B, you know, maybe have a couple volunteer counties and our other security reports.
Okay. Any other conversation? All right, since, do we want to have a motion then, if we don't have any? It seems like we're going to have to pick favorites here between Senator Peterson or Senator Tyson. Anybody online have any comments? Senator Tyson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm fine with a hybrid of A and B. I just threw C out if they were interested. I don't know what evaluating the agency's resilience to ransomware would be as a generic. That would be difficult, I would think, to look at overall. I don't know what your plans were for it, but I do know that we've had 2 attacks, maybe 3, actually 3, that were very costly to the state.
So we could even do like 2 of A, since that's what we always do, 3 of B, and do the.
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Katrin, do you do not, or do you include ransomware checks in the audits that you do with A or B?
So technically, yes. As we are looking at controls that help prevent ransomware, obviously, you know, if an agency doesn't have the 4 or 5 critical areas that would lead to ransomware, we do include that. This idea, and I'm going to talk about this as an idea and not a fully fleshed out audit, would be something like that, but more to capture more agencies that then we could talk about in public. You know, we would hide the innocent, so to speak, and talk a little bit more at a global level. But if that's not, I'm seeing your head shaking, if that's not advised, maybe a blend between A and B would be a good option.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd support a blend between A and B and leave the open to the public for ransomware off the chart.
Okay. And we have Senator Petty with a question online.
So I think it just got answered, because my question was, if I understood earlier, that this would be in closed session unless we had option C, and then that would be public. Is that correct?
That is correct. I will say that we have been doing the executive session type model for years and years, and every 3 years, and we are currently in the 3rd year, every 3 years there will be a public report that summarizes all 3 years as well. So it's not like we are completely incognito, so to speak. We certainly do have a product, but it would come out at the end of the 3rd year. That said, if we do mix it up and have any kind of variety, it makes it harder to create the 3-year project. So for example, in this current 3-year that we are finishing up, we had the very first year being a public year. So that really only leaves the 2 years that we are summarizing, which makes the universe a little bit smaller. Still doable, just something to consider is you're looking at options to kind of create hybrids, which I think we're safe. If we're doing A and B, then we're still safe to create the public version 3 years from now.
I think Senator Tyson clarified that just a moment ago, so I do support that mix of A and B.
All right, and then as part of the conversation, if we're going to do A and B, do we want one of them to be a school district? Okay. All right, so is there a motion?
And maybe
or more comments, Senate Representative Tarwater?
Thank you.
Can I ask one quick question to clarify?
Oh, sure.
When you're saying on B, cities and counties, is that what you are going for as well? So a complete mix of everything, okay?
Yeah, I think we need to see where we are across the board down there with our local governments. Representative?
I had a question on taking volunteers for cities and counties. Can you explain why we would do that rather than randomly select a few to audit? It seems like if someone was going to volunteer, they would probably have their ducks in a row, where we would want to look at somebody that may not be. So can you explain why we would want to take volunteers versus not?
Sure. There's actually 2 things. For one thing, I am not certain that folks that volunteer do necessarily have their ducks in a row. And I say that because once they know that it's a confidential report and is executive session, they also get the benefit of this being a completely no-cost product for them. And it really does help them as well. We did have scenarios in the past where at least one agency had volunteered and learned quite a bit about themselves. So that's point number one. Point number two would be really, it is maybe slightly more difficult to reach into cities and counties just from a, are we authorized type perspective. So it is nice if we have that beginning collaboration to say they want us, we want them, and it's just a little bit easier to get going.
Senator Peterson.
Back when we were doing school districts, I know we had some volunteer districts. And in one of the districts I remember, they actually had corrected some of the things just from the questions we were asking the post-audit before we even had our meeting to approve the audit. So they were really receptive to making changes and going forward.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with a motion. Feel free to amend if someone would like. I move that we approve option A and option B with option B including at least one city and one county.
And a school district in option A, right?
An option, yes, and at least one school district from option A.
All right, is there a second? Second by Senator Thompson. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Motion carries. All right, committee, the next item on the agenda is the annual IT monitoring plan under tab D. You sat down too soon, Katrin.
It's been a long day. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. You will find this information in tab D. This is the IT monitoring plan for 2026. Again, state law does require us to monitor IT projects to identify where they are at risk of failure. And again, you heard KDHE earlier. Committee rules do also require us to do an annual risk assessment. And for that, we look at the KETO report that comes out quarterly to help us figure out what projects might be in the mix for selecting. And our monitoring plan must be presented to the committee at the start of the session. And of course, with this committee not having a December meeting, we're doing this just a little bit earlier than usual. So our risk assessment was based on the second quarter of the KETO summary report. State agencies are required to report planned and active projects to KETO. And in that second quarter report, there were 18 approved projects and 20 active projects. Within the active projects, 11 of them were in good standing, 5 were in alert status, 2 were in caution, and 2 were on hold. So in looking through the available information in those KETO reports, we recommend monitoring the DCF, Kansas Management Information System Modernization, once we are done with the KDHE project that you heard earlier. And the reason we're picking the DCF system, first of all, it does modernize a legacy-based system within the DCF's Rehabilitation Services Division. And that system contains information on persons with disabilities to maximize employment, economic self-sufficiency, independence, and so forth. That current system that DCF is using is outdated, and the new system would allow the agency to provide better services, reduce administrative processes, and produce more readily available information for them. That project is currently estimated at $4.4 million and has a planned completion as of August 2027. The main calculus in selecting this particular project is that it is relatively early in the execution phase, so that our monitoring would actually add some value. Additionally, its cost is actually low enough to not require IVNV, which is independent validation and verification, which would make our work less necessary. So we do ask the committee action to decide whether to approve our plan for monitoring on that. And with that, I stand for questions.
All right, do we have any questions? Seeing none, is there a motion? I guess we would need a motion to accept staff's recommendation for the IT project monitoring plan. Is that correct? Senator
moved.
Thompson?
So
Okay,
moved.
is there a second? Second by Senator Peterson. You House members need to step it up a little bit. Yeah, no, we already got it taken care of. That's all right. I'm going to save you for later. All right, is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Motion carries. All right, let's see where we are now. Yes, we're going to go to tab E in the planned legislative report meetings, LPA Rule 15. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this is our last administrative item for today, which relates to Committee Rule 1.5. That requires that we identify which audits are of particular relevance to standing legislative committees. And then we offer to meet with the chair, the vice chair, and ranking minority member of each committee. And we're sharing today our plan with you. So this will be a little walk down memory lane, thinking back to all the audits we've issued this year of particular relevance we think have to a particular committee. So adult virtual school funding, our plan is House Ed, House K through 12 education budget, and Senate Ed. Please feel free to shout out as I'm going if you think of any other relevant committee. For the Veterans Claim Program, our plan is House Veterans and Military, House Fed and State, and Senate Fed and State. For state agencies, registries of abuse and neglect and exploitation, House Health and Human Services, House Social Service Budget, and Senate Public Health and Welfare. The audit reviewing free lunch student counts, House Education, House K through 12 Education, and Senate Education. City's use of transient guest tax revenues, House Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development, House Tax, House Local Government, Senate Commerce, Senate Assessment and Tax, and Senate Local Government Transparency and Ethics. Access controls of school district accounting systems, House Education, House K through 12 Education Budget, and Senate Education. And then today's audits, counties' costs to meet state requirements, House General Government Budget, House Local Government, House Fed and State Affairs, and House Transportation, Senate Fed and State, Senate Local Government, and Senate Transportation. And finally, the reviewing available options for state office space, House General Government Budget. Did anyone have any changes, additions?
What about Joint Building Committee on the reviewing available options for acquiring state office space? I mean, they get involved in that, but it might be nice for them to have an overview. Okay.
What about Ways and Means?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to say, at the beginning of the session, I typically present a summary of all of our audits to House Appropriations and Senate Ways and Means early in the session.
Thank you.
Any other comments or recommendations? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Kristen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. If you want to turn with me, I am on tab F of your committee notebooks now. And I'll be covering, there's 4 items on today's consent calendar. So a couple of them are ones that you all see routinely, and then a couple of them are, you do see them, but a little less often. So just a reminder that because this is a consent calendar, it doesn't actually require action from anyone. However, if you want to abstain on voting from the minutes, you're more than welcome. Or if you want to object to any of the items on the consent calendar, you're free to do so. And then that would basically pull it off the consent calendar to be voted on separately. So the first item that's on the consent calendar is the minutes from the last meeting, which was September 16th. And you can see those in attachment A. The second item on the consent calendar is accepting the performance audits that were presented today. So that includes county's costs and obligations to meet state requirements, the state office space audit, and the follow-up audit on past performance audit recommendations. The third item, this is one that you don't see every time that we do this, but is kind of how our process is designed to work on limited scope audits. So you all do have a limited scope audit proposal in front of you today. You can find that in attachment B. Chairman Francis has preliminarily approved that audit, which is titled Determining What Issues KDOR Has Identified in Its Reviews of the Kansas Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit. Just a really quick overview here. This proposal has been requested by 4 legislators, so 2 senators, that's Senator Tyson and Senator Alley, and then 2 representatives, Representative Smith and Representative Tarwater. So essentially, you all can see the objective and the methods there, but essentially what we would be doing is looking at the Department of Revenue reviews, my understanding is projects whose total cost is greater than $1 million, and we would be looking at what they have identified in those reviews of the tax credit program in recent years. And then there is a fourth item that is on the consent calendar, which is designating audits as meeting K goal. So this is something that we do annually. State law requires that the committee designates at least 4 of the audits that we completed this past year as meeting K goal, which stands for the Kansas Governmental Operations Accountability Law. So we, as your staff, went through the list of audits that we completed this past year and would propose designating the 4 audits that you can see there in tab F as meeting K goal. So that would include evaluating the alternative fuel and community service tax credits, evaluating state agencies' registries of perpetrators of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, reviewing free lunch student counts used as the basis for at-risk funding, and evaluating staff safety at Osawatomie State Hospital.
All right. Does anybody have any questions for Kristen? I'm going to get it right sooner or later, Kelly. All right. Does anybody want to abstain from approval of the minutes? Okay. Seeing none, we'll go on ahead. Next item on the agenda is the post-auditor evaluation. So we're going to need a motion to go into executive session excuse me? Okay. All right. Chris wants to say who can stay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For this executive session, people in the room are committee members, Tom Day, Director of Administrative Services, and myself.
Right. And you're going to come in after we talk to Tom, correct? Okay. For 15 minutes, right?
15, yeah. Okay. Very good. I have the motion. Yes, sir. I move that the open meeting of the Legislative Post-Audit Committee be recessed for a closed executive meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A to discuss matters relating to the annual evaluation of the post-auditor with the appropriate individuals pursuant to the justification listed in KSA 75-4319B1, because such evaluation constitutes a need to discuss a personal matter of non-elected personnel, that the committee resume the open meeting in room 546 South of the State House at 3:46 p.m. and to record this motion if adopted as part of the committee's permanent records.
All right, we have a motion by Senator Thompson. Is there a second? Got a second by Representative Williams. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. We're in executive session. All right, committee, we're out of executive session. Would anybody like to take any action as a result of the executive session? If not, we'll move on to the next item of the agenda, which is audit schedule update from Chris. It'll be in tab G. Excuse me? Oh, Senator Holzer has a question.
Hi, Representative Francis, Mr. Chair. I had to take a call a while ago, so I missed the part on consent calendar, and I'm curious if we are able to pull an item from there for discussion.
There was no item that was asked to be removed from the consent agenda, so we're past that point now.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Chris.
Okay, last item of business for today is in tab G of your notebooks. And again, just giving you a preview of what's coming up down the line as far as audit release dates. A few reminders for the committee. You guys, by committee rule, have to meet within 15 days of the start of the session for your reorganization, where you elect a new chair, vice chair, and third member of the executive subcommittee. And the Department of Commerce, by statute, has to make an annual presentation to this committee in January, so that has to happen by January 31st. But otherwise, early in the session, what's coming out, I don't have exact dates, but that is TBD when we decide to meet. Tax-exempt properties, the SNAP program. We're going to release that one in parts, most likely. So the first part will be the error rates, information about the error rates. And then several IT security audits that are kind of piling up, waiting to be released. And that 3-year summary public IT security report that's summarizing the last 3 years. Further in the session, extracurricular policies, TANF, the fire marshal, industrial revenue bonds, excuse me, KU, K-state admissions, bilingual weighting for schools, and more IT security audits that you just approved. Mr. Chair, did you want to, two things. A, did you want to set a next meeting date? And B, the committee, you need to be thinking about when you would like to meet in the session. Historically, Wednesdays at noon have kind of been chosen. Not every Wednesday, but when you do meet, Wednesdays at noon. So if you could give us some direction of which ways you want to go.
So if we meet January 12th, can we reorganize on that date also? That's before we're sworn in. Or I guess we're not sworn in this year, so. Yeah, our first day is January 12th. You want to do it January 12th in the morning? Oh, you guys have something that morning?
That's true, yeah. Typically the first day is just a kind of a mess in the Senate anyhow, so I'm just saying.
How long do you think the meeting will take with those things that you're going to have done early session? It's probably a 3 or 4 hour meeting, isn't it?
No, not that long. If you're talking about meeting like the first day of the session, probably just the IT security audits, the committee reorganization, tax exempt properties, and SNAP probably won't be ready till later in January. So not a 3 or 4 hour meeting, but hour and a half, 2.
I don't know.
Or as short as 15 minutes if you just want to reorganize.
Yeah, we usually come back at 2 o'clock though, I think, is when we. Yeah. Let me see what I got the week before. That's kind of usually a bad week for me. It just seems like, let's see. I mean, just for me, but it doesn't matter if I'm here or not. I got something. I've got something I'm supposed to be up here on the 8th for, like 4 o'clock. So you You guys want to shoot for January 8th? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So Committee Rule 4.1 says within 15 calendar days after the commencement of each regular session. You could meet, yes, to receive the audit reports. You just can't reorganize before the start of the session.
Or we can also meet like Wednesday, 1-hour meetings and chunk out the audits as well. After the start.
After the start of the session, then the committee can elect new leadership.
All right.
I would suggest Wednesday because a lot of times the committees haven't spooled up and are not all meeting until maybe Thursday.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is Wednesday, is that when they get the governor's budget, though? That Wednesday, or is that the week after?
Oh, Mr. Day has some information on that.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the State of the State this year will be on Tuesday, the 13th, and the State of the Judiciary will be prior to that the same day on Tuesday, the 13th. So the State of the State and State of the Judiciary will not be on Wednesday this year.
Yeah, but we usually do that. We don't do that over lunch usually, do we? Oh, before the, yeah. Yeah, we're not going to have very many meetings meeting that day anyway. Okay, let's shoot for Tuesday at noon, and then we'll have the regular meeting, and then we will reorganize afterwards and go from there. Does that sound good to everybody? Tuesday noon? Okay.
And then going forward in the session, Tuesdays or Wednesdays? Do you want to do lunch meetings? And you don't have to decide right this second, but, okay.
What day do we have chairman's lunch? Wednesdays, or do we have it Tuesday?
Tuesdays.
It's when? We have Thursday, so we can probably do Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday. Let's shoot for Wednesday. Okay. Is there any further business for the committee? Okay. Oh, yes, Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to, so Legislative Post Audit gave us a presentation on tax credits for low-income housing and for HPIP. Is there going to be a follow-up from post-audit, or is that just going to be something that is presented by the Department of Revenue? And is there an anticipated date for that information? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, that's fine. Since there's no follow-up from post-audit, I think I would request that this committee ask that we follow up with the Department of Revenue so that we can get a formal response. I just think that's too important to drop the ball on, so. Right, right, yes. And I just want to know how that's going to get presented to us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, you want to ask them if they've got any additional information on that, and if they'd like to present, or just give us a letter, whatever, okay? Anything else for the committee? Okay, if not, we're adjourned. Thank you.